Isn't it, when you thought that comedy was for all, and there was a time when you simply could laugh at anything. People weren't offended by anything. How times have changed in the 21st century. Have you noticed that? When you look at comedy greats from a few years ago, who remembers the very brilliant Norman Evans? He dressed up as a woman leaning over a garden wall, gossiping to an imaginary figure. He had a 50-year-plus career and even appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show around about 8 times. I'm never quite sure exactly what American audiences thought, or indeed whether they understood this Lancashire comedian, but he was incredibly funny. And as I said, had a really brilliant career. Fast forward 20 years from that, and then of course we had the late and lamented Les Dawson, who teamed up with the equally brilliant Roy Barraclough to create Sissy and Ada, 2 women dressed up, you know, their characters dressed up, gossiping in all manner of things like laundrettes, you know, each other's houses. Very successful, so it was. Now in the 21st century, we've had another man who's had phenomenal success on the big screen, on TV and on stage. Brendan O'Carroll created Mrs. Brown. Now Mrs. Brown is a phenomenon, particularly for the BBC. It rates incredibly well every time that it's shown on the BBC, even though apparently the woke-arty don't like it because it's not in fitting with exactly what they want. You know, what they seemingly want are people to tune in to non-comedy. Well, that's what you think if you watch BBC 3 or indeed BBC 4. But what's interesting now is that the creator of Mrs. Brown's Boys has hit out, basically claiming that he's having a lot of woke abuse. This is because they believe that his character, Mrs. Brown, could equally be played, get this, by a real woman. You couldn't make this up, could you? Now, Brendan created the character way back in 1992 for radio, turned it into a successful stage play and comedy, and then into television too. Not only that, 4 big films and international tours. As he tactfully pointed out though, and it's interesting this, Leonardo DiCaprio played a carpenter in a movie, so should he not be playing a carpenter? And also, should it just be a real carpenter? How stupid do you have to be? But as you can imagine, in this woke world that we're living in, seemingly they want to do everything real, authentic, inclusive, and not offending anybody. But while you are offending many people who like to laugh, and let's be blunt, Mrs. Brown's Boys receives literally no publicity from the BBC, but is consistently one of the highest rated comedy programmes of the year. And the BBC truly need this programme more than ever. That's why they do Christmas specials year after year, despite the onslaught of the negativity. Now, while Mrs. Brown's Boys may not be everyone's cup of tea, over 12 million people annually watch the Christmas special. And then, of course, there are all of those streaming and online. And as Brendan O'Carroll famously said, it's really just comedy, but Mrs. Brown is a little bit of every single one of us. And what's wrong with that? Seemingly nothing. But to this brand new woke BBC world, a lot. It remains to be seen whether Mrs. Brown can continue to survive in this 21st century woke world. Sean in the very heart of Yorkshire.